The purple sky of New Verdana burned like a dying sunset as massive ships rained fire from above. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled into dust, while civilians screamed and ran through streets filled with smoke and debris. The Kepler Confederation had always been a peaceful alliance, their technology focused on healing and growth rather than warfare. Now that peaceful nature was their death sentence. Chancellor Velos clutched the communication device with his 6-finger hands, his blue skin pale with terror. Around him, his advisors scrambled to evacuate the capital city as explosions shook the crystalline spires that had once been symbols of hope and unity. The Ravik Empire had come without warning, their black warships blotting out the stars like mechanical vultures. "Send a message again," Velos ordered, his voice barely steady. "Broadcast on all frequencies. Someone out there must hear us." His aide, a young female named Kira, worked frantically at the console. "Sir, we've been transmitting for 3 days. No response from any known civilizations. The Raviks have jammed most of our long-range communications." Through the transparent walls of the command center, they could see the enemy ships hovering like dark angels of death. The Raviks were methodical in their destruction, taking their time to savor the fear they created. They had done this to dozens of worlds before, always the same pattern. First came the overwhelming assault, then the surrender demands, and finally the complete subjugation of another peaceful species. "Keep trying," Velos insisted. "There has to be someone out there willing to help. The galaxy cannot be filled only with predators and prey." The distress signal poured out into the void of space, carried with it the desperate hopes of an entire civilization. It spoke of their peaceful ways, their desire for diplomatic solutions, their willingness to share technology and knowledge with any species that would come to their aid. They offered mining rights, scientific partnerships, cultural exchanges, anything that might entice potential allies to intervene. But the signal also contained something else, something that would prove far more important than any diplomatic offering. Embedded within the transmission were detailed tactical scans of Ravik military capabilities. Fleet compositions, weapon systems, shield frequencies, troop movements, everything the Kepler sensors had managed to record during the invasion. It was intelligence data of incredible value to anyone who understood warfare. Most civilized species, upon receiving such a transmission, would have immediately convened committees. They would have debated ethical implications, formed diplomatic working groups, and spent months crafting carefully worded responses. The galactic community was built on consensus and careful consideration, not rash action. But the signal traveled far beyond the borders of known civilized space, reaching into regions that most species prefer to forget existed. It bounced off relay stations, amplified by automated systems, and eventually found its way to a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in what the galaxy considered the backwater rim territories. On Earth, in a military facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Lieutenant Amy Foster stared at her screen with growing excitement. She had been monitoring deep space communications for years, cataloging the chatter of distant civilizations. But nothing like this had ever crossed her desk before. "Sir, you need to see this," she called her supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Colonel Jack Turner. "We're receiving a distress call from somewhere in the Andromeda sector. It's not like anything in our databases." Turner approached her station, his combat boots echoing in the underground chamber. He had fought in 3 interplanetary conflicts and carried scars from each one. When he looked at the data streaming across Amy's monitors, his expression grew serious. "Can you clean up the signal? I want to understand every word." As the universal translator worked its magic, the full scope of the Kepler situation became clear. An aggressive empire was systematically destroying peaceful civilizations, using overwhelming force to crush any resistance. The technical data embedded in the transmission revealed enemy capabilities, tactical formations, and strategic weaknesses. "Get me General Patricia Hayes on the secure line," Turner ordered, "and wake up Admiral Robert Stone. Tell them we have a Code 7 situation." Within the human military command structure, Code 7 meant only one thing: genocide in progress, immediate intervention authorized. It was a classification born from humanity's own dark history, a promise that never again would they stand by while innocents were slaughtered. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, Turner studied the tactical data one more time. The Ravix were powerful, certainly, but their formations were designed for intimidation rather than actual combat effectiveness. They had grown lazy, accustomed to facing opponents who would surrender rather than fight. Amy, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them to prep the 5th Battle Group for immediate deployment, and patch me through to Admiral Stone's flagship. The response time that followed would have shocked any civilized species in the galaxy. While other races would spend months in committee, humans had a battle fleet ready to launch within 18 hours of receiving the distress call. The massive hangar bay of a human starship Yorktown buzzed with activity as crews loaded weapons and prepared for what many considered impossible. Admiral Robert Stone stood on the observation deck, watching his people work with the efficiency that made humanity fear to cross known space. His weathered face showed no emotion, but inside, a familiar fire burned. Another bully had emerged in the galaxy, and humans had never tolerated bullies. "Sir, all ships report ready for hyperspace jump," announced Captain Lisa Hayes from behind him. Her voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had seen combat in the Proxima Wars. "The fleet is waiting for your orders." Stone turned to face his bridge crew. These weren't the pampered officers of peacetime navies. Every person on that bridge had earned their position through blood and sweat. Lieutenant Tom Bradley had survived the siege of Titan Station. Commander Diana Mitchell had led ground forces through the hell of the Mars Rebellion. Each carried scars from battles that would have broken lesser species. "Time to jump point?" Stone asked. 72 hours at maximum speed, sir," replied Navigator James Parker, his fingers dancing across the stellar charts. The Kepler distress signal is still broadcasting from 3 separate locations. The Admiral nodded grimly. 3 locations meant the aliens were losing ground fast. Most species would have seen this as a hopeless situation, arriving too late to make any difference. Humans saw it as a chance to turn the tide when hope had nearly died. In the ship's war room, tactical officers pored over the enemy data that the Kepler had transmitted. The Ravik Empire used standard intimidation tactics, relying on overwhelming numbers and psychological warfare to break their enemies before serious fighting began. Their ships were designed for show as much as function, bristling with weapons meant to terrify rather than destroy efficiently. "Classic bully behavior," muttered Colonel Beth Anderson, studying the formation patterns. "They're used to opponents who surrender at the first sign of superior force. Look at these tactical movements. No real defensive protocols, minimal point defense systems, and their command ships are positioned for maximum visibility rather than protection." Captain Michael Foster leaned over the display table, his cybernetic eye whirring as it analyzed the data. They've never faced anyone who fights back properly. Their entire doctrine is based on shock and awe against civilians. Stone joined them at the table, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Then we'll give them a proper education in warfare. Signal all ship commanders. Full briefing in 1 hour." The briefing room filled with the best humanity had to offer. These were the descendants of the species that had clawed its way out of the African savanna, survived ice ages, and turned a death world into a launching pad for the stars. Their ancestors had faced down saber-toothed tigers with nothing but sharpened sticks and had somehow won. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stone began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "we have a situation. An aggressive empire is systematically exterminating peaceful civilizations. The Kepler Confederation has requested assistance, and we're going to provide it." The room erupted in grim smiles and nods of approval. This was what they had trained for, what their entire military doctrine was built around. Humans didn't start fights, but they sure as hell finished them. "Intelligence indicates the Ravik used terror tactics," continued Commander Mitchell, bringing up holographic displays of enemy ships. "Their strategy relies on psychological domination. They expect surrender after the first engagement." Captain Hayes stood up from her seat. "Sir, what's our rules of engagement?" Stone's expression hardened. "We tried the diplomatic approach once with the Centauri slavers. Took us 6 months of negotiations while they kept capturing colonies. Never again. Rules of engagement are simple. Any Ravik ship in Kepler space is considered hostile. We shoot first, ask questions later." The assembled officers nodded in understanding. This wasn't about conquest or territory. This was about stopping genocide, and humans had learned long ago that sometimes the only language bullies understood was violence. As the fleet prepared for hyperspace jump, word spread through the human colonies. Earth's news networks carried the story within hours. Unlike other species that might debate the ethics of intervention, human public opinion was unanimous. The Kepler had called for help, and humanity would answer. In the fighter bays, pilots ran final checks on their craft. These weren't the elegant interceptors favored by advanced civilizations. Human fighters were built like their creators, tough and adaptable, capable of taking massive damage and still completing their missions. They carried enough firepower to level city blocks and armor that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. Remember, Stone announced over the fleet-wide communication system, "We're not going there to negotiate. We're going there to stop a genocide." The Ravik Empire has made their choice. Now they'll live with the consequences. The hyperspace jump commenced with a flash of brilliant light that could be seen from 3 star systems away. 57 human warships, carrying the combined firepower of a small stellar nation, vanished into the void. Their destination, a war zone where peaceful aliens were dying by the millions. The Kepler had hoped for allies, for diplomats who might negotiate a peaceful solution. Instead, they were about to meet the children of Earth, a species that understood one fundamental truth about the universe. Sometimes peace could only be achieved through superior firepower. The Ravik war chief Gorlak stared at his tactical display in complete confusion. Strange contacts had appeared at the edge of the Kithir system, moving in formations he had never seen before. His centuries of military experience meant nothing when faced with ships that seemed to ignore every rule of civilized warfare. "Commander, what are these vessels?" Gorlak growled at his tactical officer. "Their energy signatures don't match any known species in our databases." The younger Ravik frantically worked his controls, his claws clicking against the crystalline interfaces. "Sir, they're broadcasting some kind of identification signal. They claim to be humans? I've never heard of such a species." Gorlak's blood ran cold. Unknown species meant unknown capabilities, and the Ravik Empire had built its reputation on never facing truly unknown enemies. They conquered civilizations they understood, species whose weaknesses they had studied for decades. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let's see what these creatures want." The main screen flickered to life, revealing something that made several Ravik officers step backward in shock. The being that appeared looked like a predator, with forward-facing eyes and teeth clearly designed for tearing flesh. Admiral Robert Stone stared back at them with the cold patience of someone who had seen far worse things than alien monsters. "Ravik vessels," Stone said in a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever. "This is Admiral Robert Stone of the Human Stellar Navy. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from Kepler space, or we will consider you hostile." Gorlak felt his rage building. How dare some unknown species threaten the might of the Ravik Empire? Human? There is no such species in our records. You dare threaten us? We are the Ravik Empire. We have conquered 100 worlds. 20 seconds, Stone replied, his expression unchanging. The casual dismissal sent fury coursing through Gorlak's veins. This upstart species clearly didn't understand what they were facing. The Ravik fleet numbered over 200 warships, each one capable of reducing a planet to rubble. "You face the combined might of the Ravik war fleet," Gorlak snarled. "Surrender now, and we might allow your species to serve us as slaves." Stone's lips curved into what humans called a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Time's up." The space battle erupted with an intensity that caught the Ravik completely off guard. Human ships didn't announce their attacks with elaborate displays of power. They simply opened fire with weapons that had been designed to kill, not intimidate. Lieutenant Tom Bradley pulled his fighter into a dive that should have liquefied his internal organs, but his body had been conditioned through years of high-G training. His craft screamed to the Ravik formation, missiles streaming from its weapon pods like mechanical wasps seeking prey. "Fox 3! Fox 3!" He called out over the communications channel, using terminology that would have puzzled any alien listener. Multiple hits on the lead cruiser. The Ravik ships, designed for overwhelming weaker opponents, found themselves facing enemies who treated space combat like a three-dimensional knife fight. Human vessels twisted and rolled through formations that would have been impossible for other species to maintain, their crews enduring forces that would have killed most aliens outright. Commander Diana Mitchell coordinated the fleet's movements from the Yorktown's Combat Information Center, her augmented reflexes processing data streams that flowed faster than most organic minds could follow. All ships, execute formation Delta 7. Time to show them how apex predators dance. The human fleet moved like a pack of wolves, each ship covering its companions, while seeking advantageous attack positions. There was no elegant choreography here, no careful positioning designed to look impressive to observers. This was the coordinated chaos of creatures that had evolved from pack hunters. Captain Lisa Hayes brought her destroyer in behind a Ravik heavy cruiser, her weapons officer-launching torpedoes that tracked their target with predatory persistence. "Target their engines first," she ordered. "Cripple them, then finish them." On the surface of New Verdana, Chancellor Velos watched the battle unfold with growing amazement. The mysterious humans fought with brutality that shocked even the war-loving Ravik. Their ships emerged from behind asteroids like ambush predators, using the battlefield geography as natural cover. "Who are these humans?" whispered his aide Kira, watching human fighters perform maneuvers that should have torn their craft apart. Above them, Gorlak was asking himself the same question as his formation began to crumble under human assault. These weren't the careful, measured attacks of civilized species. The humans fought like their lives depended on every shot, because in their experience, they usually did. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," he ordered, but the humans gave him no time to reorganize. They pressed their attack with relentless efficiency, targeting command vessels and communication arrays with surgical precision. Captain Michael Foster's voice cut through the battle chatter as his ship hammered a Ravik dreadnought with railgun fire. "Sir, enemy formation is breaking apart. They're trying to withdraw." Stone watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Ravik had expected to face another peaceful species that would fold under pressure. Instead, they had encountered the children of Earth, creatures who understood that in the cosmos, there were only two kinds of species, predators and prey. "All ships, pursue and engage," Stone ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The battle that followed would become legendary among human military historians, not because it was particularly difficult, but because it demonstrated the fundamental difference between species that evolved in safety and those that had clawed their way up from a world that actively tried to kill them every single day. The Ravik home system had never seen anything like the human fleet that emerged from hyperspace 3 days after the battle at Kythera. Admiral Stone's ships moved through their territory like a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. What terrified the Ravik most wasn't the human superior firepower. It was their complete lack of fear. General Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching drop pods streak toward the surface of Ravik Prime like metallic meteors. Each pod carried 20 human soldiers, and there were thousands of pods falling to the atmosphere. The sight should have been beautiful, but to the Ravik watching from below, it looked like the end of the world. "Sir, enemy ground forces are requesting a ceasefire," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from her communication station. "They want to negotiate terms." Hayes didn't even look up from her tactical display. "Tell them they can negotiate after they release every prisoner and withdraw to their original borders. Until then, we keep dropping." The human doctrine was simple and brutal in its efficiency. While other species might spend weeks establishing secure landing zones, humans simply overwhelmed enemy positions with superior firepower and kept moving. They had learned this approach on Earth, where hesitation meant death and overwhelming force was often the only path to survival. Colonel Jack Turner led his battalion through the smoking ruins of a Ravik military base, his powered armor still bearing scorch marks from enemy plasma fire. Around him, his soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, securing weapons and gathering intelligence. These weren't the careful, methodical advances of peacekeeping forces. This was urban warfare, at its most effective. Turner to command. He spoke into his helmet communicator. "Base 7 is secured. Enemy casualties heavy, minimal human losses. Proceeding to next objective." The Ravik had built their military around intimidation and psychological warfare. Their bases were designed to look impressive, with towering spires and elaborate architecture meant to strike fear into conquered populations. But impressive architecture made poor defensive positions, and humans had centuries of experience in tearing down impressive buildings. Captain Beth Anderson coordinated the orbital bombardment from her position aboard the cruiser Manchester. Her targeting systems had identified every major Ravik military installation on the planet, and her ship's railguns were methodically reducing them to rubble. There was no anger in her voice as she called out coordinates, no hatred for the enemy. This was simply a job that needed to be done. Target acquired. Grid reference 77 Alpha. Firing. The hypervelocity slug struck the Ravik command bunker with the force of a small meteorite, vaporizing 3 levels of reinforced structure in a single impact. The explosion could be seen from orbit, a brief flash of light that represented decades of Ravik military planning, reduced to atoms. Down on the planet's surface, the surviving Ravik commander Vorthak watched his empire crumble around him. His species had conquered dozens of worlds through superior numbers and brutal tactics, but they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare as a natural state of being. "How do we fight creatures that show no fear?" he whispered to his aide, watching human soldiers advance through plasma fire that would have sent any sane being diving for cover. The aide had no answer. How could he explain that humans had evolved on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife actively tried to kill them? How could he make his commander understand that for humans, this wasn't exceptional violence, but simply another day at the office? The human psychological warfare campaign began on the 4th day of the invasion. Instead of the usual propaganda broadcasts, they transmitted something far more effective: documentary footage of Earth itself. The images that flooded Ravik communication networks showed a world that defied belief. Hurricanes that could level entire continents. Predators that killed for sport rather than food. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for months. Earthquakes that split the ground open like broken shells. And through it all, humans not just surviving but thriving, building cities in the path of natural disasters and turning hostile environments into homes. "This is what raised us," came the calm voice of Captain Lisa Mitchell over the broadcast. "Your move." The psychological impact was devastating. The Ravik had built their identity around being the most dangerous species in the galaxy, apex predators who stood at the top of the evolutionary ladder. Suddenly, they were confronted with beings who considered their homeworld a vacation resort compared to the hell they had crawled out of. Commander Diana Foster watched the enemy morale collapse from her position in the fleet's intelligence center. Intercepted communications showed Ravik units surrendering without firing a shot, their commanders requesting immediate evacuation from combat zones. "Sir, we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different Ravik military commands," she reported to Admiral Stone. "They're asking for terms." Stone nodded grimly. This was always how it ended when bullies finally met someone stronger than themselves. The Ravik had spent centuries terrorizing peaceful species, but when faced with genuine warriors, their courage evaporated like morning mist. "Patch me through to their high command," Stone ordered. "Time to explain how this is going to work." The terms that followed were harsh but fair. Complete withdrawal from all conquered territories, reparations for damages, and most importantly, a permanent human monitoring presence to ensure compliance. The Ravik Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for generations, had been broken in less than a week by creatures who considered warfare just another survival skill. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the neutral trading station Harmony Point, a massive structure that had hosted diplomatic meetings for over 2 centuries. But nothing quite like this had ever happened in its gleaming corridors. The Ravik delegation arrived first, their black ships docking with visible reluctance. War Chief Gorlak walked through the airlock like a condemned prisoner, his proud bearing replaced by the slumped shoulders of complete defeat. Admiral Stone entered the conference room exactly on time, flanked by Colonel Turner and Commander Foster. Their uniforms were crisp and clean, but every Ravik in the room could see the scars these humans carried. These weren't desk officers or political appointees. These were warriors who had earned their rank through blood and steel. The conference table stretched between them like a divide between 2 different philosophies of existence. On one side sat the Ravik, a species that had built an empire through intimidation and overwhelming force against weaker opponents. On the other side sat humans, creatures who had learned warfare from the most violent teacher in the galaxy, their own homeworld. The terms are simple. Stone began, placing a data tablet on the polished surface. His voice carried no triumph, no gloating over victory. This was business, nothing more. Complete withdrawal from all Kepler territories within 30 standard days. Full reparation for damages to civilian infrastructure. Release of all prisoners within 72 hours. Gorlak's claws scraped against the table's surface as he struggled to control his rage. You demand we abandon territories we have held for decades. Our people will never accept such humiliation. Captain Beth Anderson leaned forward slightly, her cybernetic eye glowing softly in the room's dim lighting. Your people are welcome to contest these terms. We have 47 capital ships in this sector alone, and reinforcements arriving daily. The threat was delivered with casual indifference, as if discussing the weather. This was perhaps what unnerved the Ravik most about humans. They didn't rage or posture or make grand speeches about justice. They simply stated facts and let their enemies draw their own conclusions. Through the observation windows, both sides could see the human fleet maintaining position around the station. The ships hung in space like sleeping predators, their weapon systems powered down but ready. Each vessel carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet, and everyone in the room knew it. What guarantee do we have that you won't pursue our forces once we withdraw? Asked Vorthak, the Ravik senior military advisor. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, the strain of the past week evident in every word. Colonel Turner answered without hesitation. You have our word. Humans don't pursue fleeing enemies unless they pose a continued threat. Withdraw to your original borders, release the prisoners, and you'll never see us again. The simplicity of the offer seemed to confuse the Ravik delegation. They were accustomed to complex negotiations, elaborate treaties with hidden clauses, and political maneuvering. Humans apparently preferred their agreement straightforward and enforceable through superior firepower. Chancellor Velos observed the proceedings from the gallery, still struggling to process how quickly his people's situation had changed. A week ago, the Kepler Confederation had been facing extinction. Now their enemies were signing surrender documents while human warships patrolled their space like guardian angels with railguns. We call for allies, he whispered to his aide Kira. We never imagined anything like this. Commander Foster turned her chair to address him directly. With respect, Chancellor, you didn't call for allies. You called for help. Sometimes the universe sends exactly what you need, even if it's not what you expected. The signing ceremony proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Each clause was read aloud, each term explained in detail. The Ravik would withdraw their forces, dismantle their occupation infrastructure, and pay compensation for the damage they had caused. In return, humans would allow them to retreat with their remaining ships and personnel intact. One final matter, Stone announced as the documents were completed. Effective immediately, the Kepler Confederation is under human protection. Any future aggression against their world will be considered an act of war against Earth and all her colonies. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for any species foolish enough to test them. Throughout the galaxy, intelligence services would soon be scrambling to understand what this meant. A new player had emerged on the galactic stage, one that treated diplomacy as simply war by other means. As the Ravik delegation prepared to leave, Gorlak turned back one final time. "What are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of species builds ships like yours, fights wars like this?" Stone's expression softened slightly, showing perhaps the first hint of emotion during the entire proceedings. "We're the children of a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to survive by becoming more dangerous than anything that hunted us." The former war chief nodded slowly, finally understanding. The Ravik had built their empire by preying on the weak, but they had never encountered true apex predators before. Now they knew their place in the galactic food chain, and it wasn't at the top. Within hours of the treaty signing, human patrol ships began establishing permanent positions throughout Kepler space. Their crews settled in for long-term deployment with the casual professionalism of people who considered this routine peacekeeping duty. They would remain there for decades, a constant reminder that some species in the galaxy wouldn't tolerate bullies. The last message transmitted from Admiral Stone's flagship carried across multiple star systems. To any species monitoring this frequency, the Kepler Confederation is now under human protection. Test that protection at your own risk.